by requesting everyone to kindly settle in. Speakers, you can take your seats. Those are meant for you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tenzin Choran, and I welcome you all to the Dialogues on Development Management. DODM is India's leading conference on development management for reimagining how we build and lead social purpose organizations. This session is called Methodologies for Studying the Long-Term Impact of Nonprofits, Existing Practices, and Future Directions. This session focuses on how long-term impact can be challenging, leading to methodological and practical tensions. This is a conversation on innovative and context-sensitive approaches to studying impact, understanding the limitations of conventional evaluation frameworks, and exploring concrete examples of how these can be applied in practices. Our speakers for the day are Subrata Singh, Executive Director at FES, Libby Johnson, Executive Director at Gram Vikas, Neelima Khetan, Managing Partner at Nous Consultants, Ankur Sarin, Academician from IIM Ahmedabad. The session will be moderated by Narendranath Damodaran, who's the ex-ED and consultant from PRADAN. A little hygiene check. Eating or drinking is not permissible. However, water coolers are available on each floor for your convenience. Request everyone to please take your seats. May we request all audience members to please put their phones on silent for calls and notifications. Additionally, flash photography is prohibited. I request Naren to kindly take over. Inviting all the speakers to please join us on stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know those people might have a little visualization problem. Huh? Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. We are here. For those who are hiding behind the dais there, rather we are hiding behind the dais. So hope you're all settled. Actually, we are not using the dais, right? Tenzin will not be using the dais. So if somebody can remove it. Yeah, so without then taking much time, we'll get on to the session right away. Huh? Oh, this is locked. Sorry, folks. No, then each of you will have to go to this. Yeah, so good afternoon again. So this session, as Tenzin just announced, it's on long-term impact and looking at methodological issues and innovating new ways of understanding long-term impact. And in fact, the word long-term impact, the long-term in the word is actually added for impact. Yeah, because in normal understanding of our impact assessment, etc., impact is actually something we say is enduring long-term changes. So, but then we are emphasizing long-term just to emphasize it's not the short-term, the routine end-line, mid-line kind of studies that we're looking at. We're really looking at organizations that have spent a generation in a given area. And the cases in point here, FAS, Neelima used to work earlier with Seva Mandir or Gram Vikas or PRADAN for that matter. So all these organizations are ones who have spent enormous amount of times working in a given area and have achieved multifaceted changes in the areas. That is what one could say. So how do we actually understand what has happened? So that is the objective. And I'll just quickly take you through the couple of objectives that we have written here. One is to understand the rationale of understanding why do we even need to look at long-term impact. I'm sure all of you are, part of the ecosystem, part of the civil society sector, looking at, understanding, studying, reading about, all about impacts and, and participating in many of the impact assessment processes. So we don't need to really explain to you many of the terminologies. So one is understanding the why at all look at long-term impact. Second, we want to look at, if you want to understand long-term impact, what are those methodological, what is the larger availability of methodologies that are available to us, the methodological landscape, and then what kind of lessons how do we actually draw lessons from the impact that has happened, or from the changes that have happened? How do you understand changes? How do we attribute changes? What has happened because you were there, and what has happened, it would have happened anyway. So the attribution questions and so on. And in this, in the process of this 1 hour, I think we will be exposed to multiple ways in which organizations have attempted to understand long-term impact. So just before we started off, I thought just to get some audience engagement here, when we say long-term impact, maybe not too many, but a couple of people, just mention very briefly as to what comes to your mind. Is there some long-term impact that you can say that you've seen or have been part of? Anyone here? Maybe a couple of people from the audience. Yeah. Either you give her a mic or she will shout.
Hi, my name is Anubha Sharma. I work with, I'm founder of an NGO called Angel Express Foundation, where we train people from the neighborhoods to set up free learning centers, where they work with children from first generation learner families from neighborhood slums. So we've had the same set of volunteers teaching the same set of children for like over a decade now. And we've seen the kind of change that they've been able to bring about in the children compared to their neighbors who are not getting the kind of intervention that these children are getting. They look and behave like children from any educated home and not like first generation learner families, not a child like a slum. We've seen them do better in every way in academics, also academically inclined. We've seen them behave themselves in public spaces.
Okay, thank you. So it has gone beyond the interventions. It's gone to how the children are behaving in public places, how their own appearance, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Here. One mic here, then there.
Hello everyone, my name is Aarti and I represent Seva Mandir. For me, long-term impact means social transformation by being in the community for a longer duration of time and bringing social transformation in the communities.
Okay, and social transformation in the manner that Seva Mandir defined in its documents, etc. Right? Okay. Maybe just one more.
Hi, I'm Nikhil from Jyoti Foundation, and we are based in Punjab. So our primary work is intervention in water, and in that we analyze and the impacts that we have in long term. Say, if we have a water purification unit installed today in a place where contamination is there, we assess what are the impacts on health in next 5 to 6 years on the community living there. So that is how we say in terms of what is the long-term impact in sense of health and the community itself.
Yeah, and if you actually were to study further beyond improved health, what actually it implicated on the village itself, that could be another level of study. But yeah, so I think we got the hang of it. So this is what we're looking for. So interventions are there, and based on the interventions, you have very long-term engagement. We're not talking about engagement of couple of years or even going and doing the study in after, normally these are 2 to 3 year projects. But when you have a series of those projects happening and one organization is engaging on a long term. Yeah, so just to put some more, so just a couple of my own personal experience in this. I used to work in this civil society sector itself. I used to work in PRADAN earlier. So in one of our earlier, places where PRADAN had been work for a long time, I remember visiting that village after 15 years. And I remember when I used to work, I worked in that village in the initial maybe a couple of years or so. Then I left, others have come, others have worked. But after 15 years, when I went there, the self-help group women who were there, members, they were very proudly, calling their daughters and saying, now look at Bhaiya dekhiye, she studies in an engineering college. So I've been able to send my daughter to an engineering college, and she's now doing, and not in the local town, town far away in Ranchi. So that kind of change, she was very proudly displaying, but that was not part of our intervention. What we had done was similar self-help groups, microfinance, and some agriculture work. But on the flip side, there was another place where, again, after some time, when we visited and spoke to the women, we understood violence had increased in the village. Our intervention, again, was something very similar. We worked on livelihoods. We would help them set up micro-enterprises. But then, how did it happen? But again, it did not come out from our impact studies, by the way. It came out at another visit, another meeting, another discussion at some different context. The women spoke that, after these programs have started, the violence has increased. Now, this was not a thing that we had intended for. This was quite a shocking surprise in a way. So, increase in violence or, unexpected impact. So, when we actually endeavor on to taking up long-term studies, we do find things that we may not have wanted to see, or maybe we were expected to see, but, we did not see that. So, there could be many surprises. So, the question comes again. Therefore, one, do we need to do studies, impact studies at all? What for? I mean, especially in the given new situation, there was some discussion, some other panels also I heard. The funding scenario is very different today. People are asking for very short-term results. 1 year project, 2 year project, 3 year project, impact funding, very, very specific result-oriented funding. So in that sense, what is the big purpose of spending a lot of money doing long-term impact? That's one kind of question. Second, even if you want to understand long-term impact, do we even know how to do it? Do we have the wherewithal? Do we have, especially organizations working in resource-constrained situations? We're all, just implementing projects and moving on and doing the next project. We don't really have the money or the time also to stop back and look back 15 years, 20 years, kya hua, kaise hua. So in that resource-constrained, time-constrained situations, is it even possible to do it? Or how costly or expensive this is going to turn out to be? So there are questions of the why part. Why do we need to do it? I mean, there are also, surely people will speak about it, all of you might know. You've heard of the proving, the improving ideas also. So there are also the positive side of why we need to do it, but also the question of why do we need to do it at all? When if the environment doesn't need it, if we don't need it. And the question is, and if at all it's all favorable, then how do we do it? What database do we have? Many a time we don't even have baselines. Many a time we don't have end lines or whatever, And end lines also will be of the project, not of the organization's institutional engagement. So when we're looking at institutional impact after long term, we have problems. There are a lot of, and therefore there are challenges, and there will be methodological issues. And this panel is primarily going to address these kind of questions as to when they engaged with this. And I will call the panelists. I'm sure the panelists are very well known to all of you. So I will start with Subrata. Subrata works in the Foundation for Ecological Security and is currently the executive director, heads the organization. So the questions that we would ask Subrata is, one, when FES wanted to do this long-term study, again the question, why did they decide to do it? And what are the kind of challenges that they thought they were kind of, what was their vision of impact? What are the methodological challenges? So this session we're going to confine into the methodology and the attributions, etc. So how did they confront those methodological problems? What was their response? And after the study was done, what was the result? I mean, how did you experience the aftermath of this, and what are the lessons that you have for the audience? So how about 5-7 minutes?
Yeah, just to put it in context of what we work on, I think at the Foundation for Ecological Security, we work largely on conservation of the shared resources by communities, basically forests, grazing lands, water resources across. So, basically what we try and work is to build what we say a simple core model, I would say, which talks about improving the tenure over the shared resources, having governance mechanisms around the shared resources, and if at all it requires restoration measures, needs to be supported. But understanding that these three elements combined actually lead to a better ecosystem as well as resilient livelihoods, and that is the larger impact that we would like to see at the community level. And understanding that working on natural resource is not a short-term process. While you can attempt at restoring it for some time, you can plant trees, you can see that, but as the resource grows, the interaction of communities and the interaction of not just the resident communities but around that region, there are a lot of expectations and a lot of conflicts, both conflicts as well as say collective action that come around this. So the challenge we have been what was important was that we were looking at intervention at the village level. We are looking at intervention at a larger landscape level with each of the villages there, and trying to see how over a period of time both livelihoods as well as the natural resources grow, transforming even from just barren landscapes to habitats of different species. And I think that is one context. But along with that, the second context is in terms of the work that is being done is not just at the community or landscape level, but how it translates into a larger influence in terms of projects or programs that happen across the landscape. And actually trying to understand this entire thing while we discussed about short-term kind of thing, but when it is about natural resources, it is both at you're looking at both at temporal scale and at the spatial scale. You're also looking at short-term income, say outputs, medium-term outcomes, and larger impact that this entire process has. So what we have tried to attempt is basically trying to look at regular monitoring sites of some of these areas over a long period of time. We've been monitoring the sites each year for about now 30 years now, watersheds, larger watersheds, trying to see what are the changes that are happening, both in terms of at the community level, use of resources at that community level, as well as what are the changes that are happening to the ecosystem, and the translation. The second thing, what we wanted to also understand, while these are, I would say, places where we have been monitoring more focusedly, we understand what are the issues of that area, but when we're working at scale, it also requires us to understand what are the changes that are happening across. And basically, in many cases, especially on NRM kind of cases, RCT is a very difficult process. And what we tried doing was largely quasi-experimental methods to look at what are the changes. And in the absence of baseline, trying to compare with control villages to look at what kind of changes that are happening, both looking at temporal as well as spatial scales. So, and I think the challenge that one has is, while you understand the changes in the resource and the particular community that you have, but larger thing is about how to evaluate changes, say on the systemic change that one is bringing in, and what could be the methodologies for looking at. I think those are questions that are still remain in terms of looking at these issues.
So you adopted a long-term longitudinal approach,
Yeah.
but it also tends to then focus narrow on the sort of expected changes, and therefore the larger ecosystem level changes, etc., becomes difficult or get less measured in a sense. So those questions remain.
No, I would say the larger impact of this entire thing at the system level is something that needs further exploration. Is what I would say. What is the impact, especially say issues of commons are very less articulated, or we don't, uh, and therefore whatever acceptance that is there at programmatic level or policy level, that those kind of things also needs to be understood and evaluated to what extent that impact is there.
But if he has had that enormous impact on policies on commons and forest and stuff like that.
Yeah, one can see a few changes here and there,
Okay.
but what has been the larger thing to make it relevant for the entire country or entire state, I think that is still a lot to be desired.
That's good. So that's, I think we have one idea. So this FEA has followed a particular methodology, and the constraints that, or the issues that still remain, I think Subrata has articulated very well. So we'll come to Liby, Gram Vikas, again an organization that has worked in Orissa, Jharkhand, etc. for a very long period of time, and has actually innovated many ways of working with the tribal communities, with rural poor communities in Orissa. Most notable of that is a water and sanitation program that I think all of us are really aware of. So, Libby?
Thank you.
Same set of questions. Yeah.
Last year at DODM, I was on a panel that argued against standardizing metrics while evaluating, and I will stick to my guns and I will not follow the questions that Naren referred to. Those of you who can read something and listen to something else, most welcome. The others have a choice of either reading what's on the screen or listening to me. Those are going to be not necessarily the same, because that is there. That's there for record, and I don't need to repeat what is there. I wanted to share a bit about, one was the why, and for me, both as Gram Vikas, as somebody who's been in the sector, and for the sector as a whole, I think this question of why do we measure impact is something that we need to consider, because when 3 years ago, when within Gram Vikas we said, nobody knows what we've done. It's a question that constantly came us, because people said we are doing water and sanitation, whereas we believed we had done much more than that. So the need for doing a measurement came from a very, very internal expression of, we need to prove to ourselves before we do it for others that we've done something. That's because unlike FES, which is focused from the beginning on commons as the matter to deal with and everything around commons, Gram Vikas's work has been very people-oriented. Sometimes it was renewable energy, sometimes it was drinking water, sometimes it was sanitation, it has been education. So there was never been one anchor in the last 45 years that we put our work on, except that we said, okay, there is this group of people in Odisha, we believe we are confident of working with them, we will work with them. And over four decades, we've done many things. So how does an organization like that measure its contribution? And that's a fundamental question we tried to answer. We had people like Neelima helping us with figuring that out. What we realized was it was outside conventional M&D frames, because conventional M&D frames could not answer this question. So we needed to create something new or something different. And we also, like I said, we did it for ourselves. We did it ourselves to prove to ourselves or to convince ourselves that Gram Vikas as an organization, it's worth for us to continue being there. Because the relevance of this organization cannot come because we have enough money to run another three years, or we've been there for 45 years, so why don't we live for another 15 years? But is there actual relevance for the mandate that we set for ourselves over these last many years? Is there relevance for us to continue? So that is a fundamental question we asked. So we were not doing it for donors. We obviously will use it for donors to convince, it's a fundraising strategy. That's a different matter. So like Subrata also said, we were not, Naren also mentioned, it's not about attributing anything change to Gram Vikas. And it was saying that, okay, what did we contribute? And from the many things we decided, we will focus on 3 things, because that is where we were confident that there will be evidence available for some kind of change, positive or negative, whatever came out. So we said we will look at our contribution in school education, and we framed it as intergenerational change, because our first residential school started in 1982. The first class 10 students passed out in 1999, and when we were doing it in 2023, 24 years had passed. So, which means the first graduate out of our school had, gone to do something in life. They were all like 40, 45 years old. The second we did was around the institutions that we built to manage water and sanitation in the villages. And we said, how do these institutions do it? Do people still get water? Do they still get water because of the institutions or despite the institution? And the third one was more less spoken about, less understood part of our work around how we had enabled farmers who are then hitherto hunter-gatherers, shifting cultivators, to look at more settled forms of farming and more production that was little more surplus oriented than and just being subsistence oriented. So that's the approach we took, and we framed it, we explored, and we did not have baseline data. We had to recreate the base by narrative, getting people to narrate what happened. Neelima anchored the work on looking at the education, so they had to go back to census of 1981, the village handbook of 1981, to look at how many villages had schools at that time, because today most of these villages have schools, which did not exist 45 years ago. So a lot of recreation of databases had to happen, but most of the baseline came from people's narration. And that I think is why I say conventional M&D frameworks cannot do it, because conventional M&D frameworks cannot translate narrated experience into data, unless we deliberately do that. So that was definitely a serious challenge. And I think the biggest challenge that we thought we will figure out going forward was this whole process of intangible changes. Because, some examples, like for instance, 2 girls from the same village, from the same age group. One went to a Gram Vikas school. She went back as a homemaker. Another girl who did not go to she completed education with great difficulty. She became an Anganwadi worker. And she became the anchor of change in the village. And she convinced her friend to look beyond homemaking. So the Gram Vikas school could not. Whereas somebody who went from another school convinced somebody from Gram Vikas. So we were not finding patterns. And I think the greatest lesson that as a sector we need to learn is, can we as a sector talk about, and this is very, and I'll stop with this piece, Naren, is as a sector, our relevance, our need is being continuously being questioned. From outside, from within, from multiple forms of social action that emerges today. A lot of standardization of what results, a lot of standardization of inputs and expected results. So I think one of the things that we can do for ourselves is to develop a method of understanding our work with intangibles as being the more important one than tangibles. And I say this, this is not a 5-year, 6-year, or even a decadal matter. It's probably an intergenerational matter. But many organizations in the sector, I think we need to come together, and ISDM kind of institutions have a role. Ankur kind of people have a role to facilitate this, to bring them together to look at, yes, we have contributed, but we don't know how much of that can be credited to us. And therefore, the biggest gap, the next step of this methodology has to be imagining what would have been had we not been there. So that to me is a greater measure and something that we would really like to work to imagine the situation had Gram Vikas not started the school, and which our report does highlight, but from a sectoral point of view, I think it's important to think about that. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Libby. It's pretty fascinating. So when you're saying, when approach of the organization itself is to identify a set of poor people and work with them in a long term, irrespective of, so not programmatically, as in much more community responsive kind of approaches. And your approach is actually building community leadership. And then what kind of changes those change agents are going to further trigger, we don't know. So therefore, in that situation, and if you allow that process to happen for a couple of decades, you never know what are those wonderful surprises that we will be faced with. So in a sense, it becomes difficult to really say 1 to 1, so much percentage, etc. This is a change that Gram Vikas has caused or any long-term NGO has caused. Therefore, I agree with you in that point that, the non-tangibles are actually far, far more valuable than the tangible reports that we can make. But unfortunately, I don't know how ready is the world more and more we move into the more different kind of funding scenarios and partnership scenarios. This still remains big question. So I think we'll take it to Neelima.
Just a clarification to what you said. We are still doing projects and programs.
Yeah.
It's a series of projects and programs leading to some form of a change. So a biogas program in the village, followed by a water and sanitation program in the same village, to a watershed program. 3 different types of engagements by an external actor. 3 different types of government convergence and linkages happening. Can a series of such disjoint programs lead to change of a certain nature that people think it's valuable for them, society thinks it's valuable to invest in? That is also the question.
So at some point of time, then it is not the programs that Gram Vikas is doing, but it's Gram Vikas itself. Because, Gram Vikas manifests itself in multiple forms and formats and programs, and change happens. So how do we measure that against? Back to the original question. So Neelima, I think it's a good segue to take it to you. So you could respond to some of these conceptual questions as well as then in your current understanding, because you also helped Gram Vikas do this study and your enormous experience in the sector, and she's been one of the early doyens of development in the country itself. I'm sure all of you know her. She's been also in Seva Mandir for a very long time and subsequently across the sector. Yeah. She's feeling very embarrassed.
Of course, he's doing his best to embarrass me. Thank you very much, and it helps to have a rebel in your midst. So since Libby has opened the gate, I am also not going to follow the script too much. Although whatever I'll say is a little bit around what is written, but I shall not follow that. So I think the question that Naren asked and the conversation that's happened till now, I think the first point to me when the title of this chapter, of this session is about long-term impact. No? So one is, of course, define long-term, but I think even more than defining long-term is define the purpose. What is the purpose of your organization? If the purpose of Libby has actually alluded to some of those things, and I worked most of my life in Seva Mandir. And Seva Mandir and Gram Vikas in some senses are very similar, which is why it resonates. I'm not speaking on behalf of Seva Mandir. Seva Mandir's CEO is Ronak, who's sitting right here. So if you have more questions on Seva Mandir's experience, please do catch him. So define the purpose of the organization. If the purpose of the organization is that you want to kind of increase the annual income of X women by Y amount in so many years or every year, then that's the purpose. Or if your purpose is that you want to put X number of girls into colleges or through schools. So everything is, if you're talking about long-term impact, and of course, what you said about PRADAN, maybe PRADAN, I don't know if you had defined your impact as livelihood improvement, and then when you went in, for you it was a surprise that either about violence or about going to education. But I'm saying it stems from purpose, because for a lot, if the organization is doing the same thing, which is a well-defined thing that Libby also referred to, then long-term is also not a challenge, because it's that same thing which you'll keep measuring year on year. And some of these things are more tangible. So if it is income increase of X rupees, if you want to have 10,000 women who are earning more than 1 lakh rupees every year, then that's something that you will measure this year, and that's something that you will measure 5 years down the line, 50 years down the line. So the long term, I'm just saying it gets complex when you have organizations like field-based organizations, mostly like Seva Mandir, like Gram Vikas, who've defined their long term in terms of what you spoke, what Aarti said, social transformation, what I would say that, enhancing the agency of individuals and communities so that they can lead more wholesome lives, whatever. And for them, like Libby said, for Seva Mandir also, the series of initiatives that it undertakes are but kind of response to what is the need of the community at that point of time or what seems sensible to do. So so organizations like Seva Mandir or Gram Vikas are not wedded to pasture land development. For them, pasture land development is the path towards community kind of solidarity, which is their longer term purpose. And so the first thing that I want to say here is that this challenge of long term impact that we are talking about is very much linked to the purpose of the organization. And if the purpose of the organization is straightforward, and there's no value judgment here, zero value judgment. There are different kinds of organizations. The world needs all kinds of organizations. But the challenge that Naren is referring to and which Ankur will be talking about, I think becomes a challenge when you have a purpose that is kind of in Seva Mandir we used to say it is a generational kind of a task, or it's a generational purpose or objective that we are working. It is then that you struggle with how are you going to measure that? And I know whatever I know about Seva Mandir's work, that struggle is a constant struggle. Even today, it is a struggle. And then the second thing, and I'm going to talk more about this kind of, but this struggle also, as Libby said, again, as I said, I'm going to repeat many of the things. This measurement is not a measurement that most donors are interested in. Most donors are only interested in for the thing for which they have given you money. If they've given you money for education, they're interested in that. And there they may say that we are interested not just in how many girls have gone to school, but we are also interested in what those girls did, after school and what they have done. Or in skilling, we are not only interested in how many people you have skilled, we are interested in how many have been employed. We are interested in how many have been retained after 1 year. We are interested in what is the income. So you can keep going levels within that, So donors are going to be interested only in that. But as an organization, if you feel that's your purpose, for you it is an important question to figure out, are you actually working towards that purpose? And again, for that, I feel in all honesty, something that's written here also and what Libby said, I think Subrata also referred to it, this attribution is going to be an impossible challenge for you to solve. In this long-term, vague transformation that you're looking for, how on earth are you going to attribute either the positive or the negative? Then I will question on both. Even on the negative, I'll say, why are you taking it on yourself? Or the positive also I can. So attribution is an impossible challenge. And at best, even in the Gram Vikas study, you try and put some data. And of course, if somebody were to ask me, I will say very strongly beyond anecdotal, based on the data, I will say that Gram Vikas schools, brought about a hugely they had a hugely transformative impact on the lives of the children. So you can, but I'm saying you can break down but education is not your core purpose. Huh? So I'm saying your core purpose, I don't know how you're going to assess the impact, but you can, the subsets of that core purpose, whether you call it your, theory of change, whether for Seva Mandir, commons is an integral part of it, for you maybe energy or maybe education, whatever. So for those subparts, what I'm saying is, try and do as honest an assessment of those subparts at least. And then hope that your theory of change holds. Theory of change may not be the most popular phrase here, but I'm just using it to say that that's what you had thought, that add up these bits and it will lead to enhanced agency of the communities. Add up these bits and it will add to transformation at an individual level. So I'm saying, if I'm sounding vague, but I'm just saying on those, it's hard to measure, it will be anecdotal, attribution will be impossible, but on your theory of change and the steps entailed within that, there, to differing degrees of perfection, you can measure, is what I'm saying. It may not be great, and all kinds of tools exist, from RCTs to kind of, all the other things that exist. But you can use, or qualitative inquiry-based assessments. You can do all of that. So that's maybe the main point that I want to make, is that keep measuring the intermediate outcomes as well as you can, as honestly as you can. That's what you can do. The long-term impact, and I'm talking of long-term of the kind that Vikas or Seva Mandir talk about, I'm saying, in all honesty, if you were to ask me, I think it's extremely difficult to do that. And also, just last comment in that, in the long-term measure, when we get into that, I think there is also sometimes, like you said about the village that you went back to, a village that I went back to where I worked 40 years ago. And I came away disheartened because suddenly the highway had come in and the village didn't look at all like the village in which I had worked. All the common lands on which we had worked had been eaten away by the highway. And I was left wondering, should I now begin to say that there was no long-term impact of what I did? Or not I, whatever, all of us did. But I also, after I'd beaten myself a lot that night, but I also woke up and I said that I think for the generation that lived at that time, whatever work was done mattered a huge lot. No? And then, of course, if the highway came and things changed, so also don't beat yourself too much is what I'm saying. But yeah, thank you.
It is quite comforting or discomforting, as you could take it. I mean, don't beat yourself much on it, but attribution becomes extremely difficult, at least as Neelima says. But then that is also the big question, right? I mean, how do you attribute? So all this issue, all the studies, the long-term studies, the quantitative methodologies, the RCTs, the qualitative narratives, etc., is actually to understand. So what did I contribute to this? So in a sense, the attribution, contribution issue is still out in the open. How much can I and how do I do that? So with that, I think, and then how do we get donors interested in all this? And especially with reducing donor patients, etc. Is it even worthwhile doing it? No? Yeah, please go ahead. Because we'll
sorry for breaking the. मैं एक छोटी सी बात और ऐड करना चाहती हूँ. Asking that question about the longer term purpose is not only important for your man ki tasalli. I think it is hugely important nowadays actually, because question marks on the contribution of civil society nowadays have become more pronounced. So I just want to say that asking that question and attempting to answer that is actually a sectoral service, a societal service.
Yeah, I think that's well taken. Yeah, I think with that, I think we'll quickly move to Ankur. Yeah. So Ankur is a professor at IIM. He will introduce the rest of himself later. So with PRADAN, ISDM, and supported by Ankur here, who is the lead of the study, we have undertaken again a similar impact study of long-term impact study of PRADAN in 2 locations in PRADAN's area, where PRADAN has been working for 2.5 to 3 decades. And again, the same set of issues have come up as to there's no when we started, kind of formally, informally, work started, there's hardly any, baseline data existing, etc. So through all that, maze, ISDM and together with ISDM, PRADAN and Ankur, we have tried to create some kind of a method out of madness, and I think that's what he's going to talk about.
So, the reason, unlike all my other co-panelists who walk the talk, I only, walk when I talk. So I said, and I'm used to sort of standing when I'm speaking. So Apologies for that. But before I get to the PRADAN, and I'm not standing here as a representative of PRADAN by any means. I don't have those abilities. So I would just like to begin with pointing out that we're talking about organizations who've been around for already generations, right? So these organizations have earned their right, and they should use their right to talk with a lot of swag, right? And I think that's the point that I want to make as far as this question of long-term impact. I mean, if you've been survived for so many years, you've done something good, period. Right? And that's the first thing that one needs to acknowledge. And just to address this big elephant in the room, I don't know how many of them are here, the donors. I mean, the bottom line is, when you're talking about long-term impact and we're talking about organizations like yours, the donors are as reliant on you as you may be on them. And let's not forget that. I mean, if you don't exist, the donors also don't exist. Their livelihoods also don't exist. So let's also sort of, be very clear about that. Now, as I said, I mean, I just want to frame this idea of long-term a little bit. And I would like to begin by if you've not watched this TED talk by Chimananda Adichie on dangers of a single story, then please, if there's one thing that you do after DODM, please go watch that one talk. Because the point is, I mean, this is where I'm going to share my own personal views a little bit on long-term impact before I get to the slides that I've committed to, since I'm, following the Diggaj log baithe hain, so I can follow what they do. So, I mean, the idea here is when you're talking about long-term impact, and this is your chance to tell your story, right? And you've earned the right to tell your story in your terms. And I think that's very important, because otherwise other people have been determining where you begin your story from and where you end it. And if you watch that talk, you'll see why that is so important, right? I mean, just a brief reference to the fact that, look, the stories that we grew up with were written by Enid Blyton about us eating scones at evening time with tea. None of that happens, right? Well, you've earned the right to tell your story, and this is your chance. So that's the place, I think, where conceptually the idea of long-term impact should begin, right? So yes, it is a chance to write your story. It is also a chance to write, to express, to learn, and to communicate. And that's what we've heard repeatedly, right? And undoubtedly, a whole host of learning goes on as you work. And if there wasn't that learning, we would question you. Did you really know everything when you started? Right? And so obviously a whole lot of learning happens, a whole lot of changing happens. And this is why the question of attribution also becomes really difficult. What are you going to attribute any change in outcome to? Where you started, where you ended, or everything that happened in between, right? So this idea of attribution is not something that I personally feel, A, we can even realistically handle. B, I also question it from a perspective of desirability. If we imagine the other gold standard, we all have that reference of a gold standard to an RCT, but that other gold standard that development organizations often have is to make ourselves irrelevant in a community, right? I'm not saying that it's something like chasing the end of a rainbow. We may not be able to realize it, but really, would you want ever to stand up in front of the communities that you have worked with, or with the government or other stakeholders, and tell them, no, it was not you, it was me, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of attribution, to be able to separate out this sort of, okay, this happened because of you, this happened because of me, this happened because of them. That's not how development or any of this complex work happens. So the place that I would, again, referring to another brilliant piece of work that I think on the question of evaluation and the question of accountability. Because what you heard implicitly and, with them is, at the end of the day, we've been around for so long, we want to hold ourselves accountable. And that comes from a place of sort of dedication and service, right? And I think accountability is also a big issue why we talk about metrics, why we talk about evaluation. But here, especially here, when you're talking about the long term, I think we need to use what Honig and Pritchett talk about as account-based accountability and not accounting-based accountability. The accounting-based accountability are those thin numbers, data, etc., that you're measuring every day in, day out. And those numbers definitely help. So yes, I completely agree with Neelima when she said that you have to be measuring what is tangible, what are the intermediate outcomes that are being created, because at the end of the day, you will be able to create your account. You would be able to say why you did what and why that was the right thing to do. And that's again back to the idea of a story. You have to construct these stories, and I think doing a long-term impact assessment is in some ways constructing the story of yourself, your history, right? Now, how do we differentiate it between, say, what we might be doing methodologically in a short term versus long term? Well, one, when we're talking about long term, our emphasis has to be on outcomes that are maybe systemic in nature, so they occur because of interactions. B, maybe they just, because they occur over a much different time frame. So even when we create some intangible, and we always, we already pointed to several of these, intangible effects, intangible impacts, at some point they start emerging as tangible outcomes as well, right? So now this is an opportunity to be measuring those that have taken some time to express themselves. So we are talking about a slightly different set of outcomes when we are talking about doing long term. Okay. Now I will try to stick to the slides and talk about what we've attempted to do with PRADAN and ISDM. I have just been like the people that the folk that IMA produces merely are consultants largely, right? And you can think of me as another representative of that person who just consults. Okay, okay, we haven't reached here. Okay, my slides are not here. Oh, are they? Okay. So what we've tried to work with is the idea of a realist evaluation. Now, the idea of a realist evaluation doesn't lay out sort of a series of rigid steps that one needs to take when one is trying to do an evaluation. In a way, again, with the theme that I'm trying to work with, of sort of narrating your story, it helps you narrate a story, right? The emphasis with the realist evaluation is not asking what works, but instead it is asking what works, where, and how. So it's an acknowledgement in a sense that there is no single silver bullet that we have. And it is also an acknowledgement that what we do does not necessarily lead to positive outcomes in all the places that we work with. It does not necessarily lead to sort of successful outcomes in all geographies or all people. But in certain contexts, the work that we do as a development organization, the interventions that we make, are able to interact with the context. It could be a physical question of a physical geography, in the sense like we figured out with PRADAN as we've been working there, the question of the groundwater. How deep is the groundwater has played a significant role in terms of also how PRADAN evolved its strategies at different places, which lead to different outcomes, right? It could be a question of socio-cultural geography. What is the nature of sort of social capital or cultural associations in that village, which then lead to perhaps more effective collective institutions? So these are the kind of contextual factors that come and impinge how your intervention might have affected things there to translate them into outcomes. So the way we've been going around and using this broader approach is a twofold. One is where we've done more qualitative forms of data collection, focus groups, in-depth interviews of both community members, people who worked with PRADAN for a long time, who were sort of active when these programs began, because like Naren said, we don't have any baseline data here, right? So and a whole lot of, and this is where the old program documents are also helpful, because they've also captured history in some form, right? So having an archive of these old program proposals, all of that is really incredibly helpful when you talk about long-term impacts. So through that, we are tracing out what we call CMOs, which are these sort of, essentially saying, okay, look, there is a context which is acted on and that changes, which produces certain outcomes via some mechanisms. Now, to start with these mechanisms, you could look at these as theories, sort of revised program theories. You can look at them as hypotheses. But then you go out, in a sense, first, what we've been trying to do is qualitatively validate that. And then we are now trying to quantitatively validate what we think we might be able to measure using quantitative surveys, right? How effective this is going to be, honestly, at this point, we do not know. Because these are conjectures that, okay, something like this, something like this, we would be able to measure even when we went up and conducted a survey, right? But what the qualitative part has done, it has helped us refine what are the things that we should be measuring. So if we are trying to trace out the story, then what are the pieces, what are the different variables or data that we should be capturing so that our story, when we share it with you at some point, hopefully soon, would be persuasive to you, right? And at the end of the day, that's really where I want to end on. All methodology is very contingent on it being persuasive. And what is persuasive or not persuasive definitely depends on the audience. But in this case, when we are talking about long-term impact, and it is also much about what is shared within the organization. Rukmini Banerjee, who was here in the previous panel, she said a beautiful thing. At the end of the day, we are bringing in new people to work on these ideas. They have to remain excited, right? And so this is also a way of potentially generating excitement there. So I'll end there and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. So this study is currently a work in process. So in the sense, I think the realist framework that ESDM has used kinds of builds on many of the questions that the earlier panelists also raised as to when you don't have data, when you don't have stories. How do we actually build that story? How do the right story looking at multiple sources? And so internal documentation, proposals maybe. All kinds of internal documents, multiple stage proposals that were written, donor reports, maybe articles written by the people working in the field, training modules. So they would have looked at, and I know in PRADAN they're looking at an enormous amount of documentation that exists, not necessarily, systematic quantitative studies. In addition, there are also quantitative studies being done and also a lot of qualitative methodology. So using a multiple methodology approach and using whatever information is possible, trying to create a story. And end of the day, as he says, be convinced about it and use that for internal communication as well as for external communication. So at this point of time, I think we can take questions. Then last, we'll have half a minute each for each panelist. So we started late. Oh, okay. No. So questions.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentations. So the whole idea of agency, there was...
Where is it coming from? Can you also introduce yourself a bit, please?
My name is Vijay. Idea of agency and also heard this whole... And then we heard this idea of social capital and how it leads to the creation of collective institutions. So my question is, where do we start? Do we start with agency and work towards system change? Or do we work with system change and go towards agency? And the generation and putting the institution in the middle of all this. What is the role of the NGO or the institution in the whole thing?
I have.
Maybe take a couple of questions and then.
So, two comments.
Can I go ahead?
I can.
Okay. So I'll start. I'm Rohan Singh. I'm from British Asian Trust. I manage MEL there. A year ago, when Oak Foundation was winding up, they did an outcome harvesting study approach, where they looked at, where they talked to stakeholders and talked about what is the change that they have brought. And so it was again a qualitative process where they did FGDs, facilitate, and then they went back, right? What led to those changes, etc. So how is that different from the realist methodology that you are using right now, or are they basically similar? So that would be.
Short answer is they're quite similar because the realist evaluation is a larger umbrella. But we can talk more.
So I'm Ronak, I'm from Seva Mandir. So one question which comes for this attribution issue is, if the changes are measured after say 30 years, what has changed in that village, and we just leave it to there only. We were part of that journey, so something has changed, and we contributed that in that part. Do we really need to take out the organization and understand that this organization has made some changes? I'm just kind of, because we are still a small actor there. So ultimately the changes are going to be with lot of things changing there. So why do we need to assess in that form? That's one thought. And second is I'm going for that for-profit analogy is brand value. Corporates assess themselves by a brand value. Their customers like them, then they are there. Otherwise, they will not exist there. So if as a social organization we are there and community has liked us as a brand and they have trusted us, worked with us for 40 years, is there a way to use that as a methodology to understand? Not for us, but at least to tell to the external world. Because the current pressure of which is coming from, I think there is a language probably we need to use through which we can communicate to that world. So I don't know if there is a method which can be drawn from that sector and of the brand value assessment.
We'll take one more question and then not asking a question, I would like to compliment what has been spoken. I am Joe Prabhu from Don Bosco National Forum for the Young People at Risk. I'm based here in Delhi. I have worked with the young people at risk for the last 39 years. It's a long term of a service with Don Bosco. Because I'm a priest, I'm committed to that organization. And what has changed me in this whole 39 years, the paradigm shift that has taken place in my life, more than impacting, that I have still to learn, that is in the process. So what I noticed is that these people, young people who are taking risks in their life, running away from their family, or taking drugs, or going into labor, child labor, or child marriage, they are taking a risk. Do I see them as taking the risk, or how do I turn the risk into resource? They are resourceful people because of the socio-economic or a family situation. They are let into risks. So I have noticed that what I learned from them is that resilience with which even the normal children coming from a normal family don't have that kind of resilience to put up the shame and fame that they face. And the second thing that I have learned from them is you need to persevere, patience. Life is a slow process. And I have seen them. If we persevere and patient with them, there is an internal behavioral change taking place. If you hurry and expect a change in a duration of 1 period, 2 years period with the young people at risk, never happens. That's the second lesson I've learned. The third lesson that I have learned is that it's a lifelong commitment and accompaniment. They are like my family. I may not be a married person, but I have numerous children. Back in Africa, I worked for 19 years. Here in India, 19 years. So I can say that what has changed my life is that my way of understanding them, to go to their roots and understand from their level and empathize with them. And the third lesson I have learned. In this whole process of learning, I can go on. The challenges that I met is also, was it a success? What we call it, very often organizations, NGOs, we call it success story. Is it the success of the organization, or we bring about a success in the life of an individual, in the beneficiary. And the second thing is the sustainability. Sustainability, with that I stop.
We have to keep it short.
Yeah, with that I stop. And individuals who come into our lives, what I can say that even though there's 39, some of those or some of them still keep in touch. I have worked in various parts in the country and outside the country, but we are still in touch. That friendship that we cherish lifelong. That's the lesson I have learned.
Thank you.
That's the impact I
Thank
feel.
you so much. That's very, very inspiring. Yeah. Thank you.
Could I just quickly do a
quick,
30-second
please.
question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you so much for this wonderful panel, first of all. I'm Monica. I work with Population Council Consulting. We're based here in Delhi only. My question is as a reflection, but also leaving a food for thought. When we're working with communities over large time periods, are we also looking at certain assumptions when we are implementing the interventions, and to consider those assumptions when we look at long-term impacts as well? Just leaving that. Also, when we look at organizations such as all the ones that are here right now, one is, of course, we look at an end goal, we look at evaluations, we take different methodologies. Realist is a wonderful method, which we've also been using in different contexts. What about more of an embedded science approach where we take from the beginning as well? Not looking at just waiting at, okay, now let's look at what the impact is. But let's do a regular learning cycle, something what you said, sir, in terms of regular monitoring, but a more embedded way of understanding what works, what doesn't work, for what context as well, where regular learning cycles happen. What is the scenario right now for organizations such as yours to integrate such methodologies? And going forward, how can we also work with you on that front? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think have you noted down these questions so you can answer? Okay. Yeah, Neelima. Yeah, there were a couple of questions.
I mean, I'm in agreement with what you said in terms of can we embed in some ways these ideas of evaluation into our day-to-day routines also, so that when a lot of these organizations began, the datafication that we live in, the world that we live in right now didn't exist. Right? Today it does. I'll just give you a quick example. Mahila Samakhya. Now, it's an I don't know what to call it, a movement, an organization, and there's no questioning the impact that this movement played in terms of gender programming, except everything in India. But Dr. Vimla Ramachandran, who was the first director, she herself, at one we were having this discussion, and she's like, I wish we had actually captured some data in the beginning, because we felt that we were just wanting to give so much agency to the people that there would be so many different things they would be doing, and therefore we didn't create any mechanism to capture any data at all. So there was this regret that she had, because after so many years, some of these questions were also being asked. So I'm completely in agreement with saying, yes, can we do that? And I think that's also what Neelima is also talking about when she says, keep looking at what are the intermediate outcomes, right? Beyond what is immediately that you might be chasing. I think that's the point that you were also making.
Yeah, just to...
In fact, surely formally or informally, I'm sure, all these organizations have an internal learning processes. So it's not that. So how systematic it is, it's a very separate.
Yeah, I'll just maybe say one. So I also don't know about this long-term impact assessment that we are talking about, and please forgive me if I'm not responding directly to the question that you asked or others asked. But just building on that, so the intermediate, measurement of the intermediate, we are all understanding. And again, like I had said in the beginning, it really depends on, the problem is when you have defined the long term as something more than the intermediate. That's where. Actually, the problem I'm saying is not only that if you've defined the long term as, let's say, Seva Mandir has defined, that helping build communities and individuals kind of control where their life goes or have agency or whatever. Actually, it's even beyond that. Beyond that is, what is actually the relevance of an organization like Seva Mandir? What is the relevance of an organization like Gram Vikas or FES or any other? To me, fundamentally, this search with the long term or the obsession with the long term is, for me, there, because you can take the question, and at that level, it's only a philosophical belief that a strong civil society matters to a democracy. You can say it's a theoretical belief, it's an ideological belief, it's a philosophical belief, but that's the belief on which most of us are working. That whatever we may be doing, whether we are doing education, we are doing differently abled, whether we are doing, but the idea of civil society's presence and doing whatever it is doing is critical to a democracy. And how on earth are you going to prove it? How are you going to find a long-term impact assessment to establish that, well, maybe Putnam did that, no? And maybe Putnam did say that in northern Italy versus southern Italy when he compared. So yeah, all that I'm saying is I think the challenge is not about measuring the intangibles, measuring the tangibles. For that, to differing degrees of certainty, to differing degrees of confidence levels, you can answer that. But I think the trouble in one's head is the long-term question on one's relevance or the relevance of the sector.
So just to answer the point that Vijay you raised is, whatever terms you used are all labels of eventual outcomes, agency, social capital, because none of us are projectizing agency. Agency is a result of several things happening. So you start from where you start. You start from skilling, or you start from credit, or you start with organizing women. The assumptions that, there was a question on assumptions. So the assumption is that if I get women together, get them to talk to each other, save a little bit of money, at some point, one of them will want to come and tell the other Didis about her husband beating her at home. That is agency. But it's not projectizable in a way that I can say that if I do this, she will talk. I don't know. So a lot of our work, fortunately, is in the realm of that, unimaginable in many ways. So eventually all of this agency and social capital are all labels we use. And what we've been talking about is at the next level of measuring that.
Is it possible to capture that agency and that social capital?
That I think, like a lot of the M&D frameworks do that.
I think if we look at an organization like this, it is part of the social change that is happening, and as a process, any intervention is just a trigger in which it's actually working with communities to actually shift the needle a bit. But that itself, to a certain extent, leads to certain kind of ripple changes. So one cannot determine what is happening exactly because of that trigger, and each community would actually respond very differently from others. But just to understand whether the issues that one was looking at was relevant at that point of time, was that where the organization's contribution in that larger social change, if there has been any relevant kind of a change, I think that is what we were trying to understand, rather than a real attribution to that organization because of that intervention.
We can go back and talk in Udaipur, but I think that was an interesting point, Ronak, which you said about using categories from another sector, about whether brand value, the way it is measured, and I think it is an interesting thought. Of course, in case of Yeah, so you'll have to think about, because many people can say that in case, how will you measure brand value? Because your consumer is not paying, but I think your consumer is actually paying a much higher price because he's changing his behavior. So when you work with the community and nudge it towards working on common lands as commons, or work on educating their girls against so then when the community responds, the price that they have paid is a much bigger price than they would have paid for a normal brand kind of a transaction. So I think it's an interesting thought, Ankur, if you may think about it in future.
I mean, I just want to also summarize and reiterate something. I mean, if you do get into the idea of the realist evaluation, I would really urge you not to get too bogged down into these questions of sort of what exactly is context and what exactly is mechanism. Look at these as heuristics and work with that. But I also, I mean, Ronak's point, I think, also helps me say something that I wanted to. I mean, so if you have a theory, if you have a hypothesis that in a sense your brand has been built, so then the next conjecture is that they trust you more. Then the question to ask is, okay, if they do trust us more, what does that tangibly translate into? Can I measure something? So if we say, okay, the time that it takes for us to start a new initiative in a community, right, has that diminished or not? Right. So thinking systematically through in this manner, potentially working with your conjectures, your hypotheses, therefore, what is the measure that I should be chasing? It maybe might help us as we sort of move along.
Points to add. One in reference to this discussion. In Gram Vikas's case, one of the things that we've been doing now is to ask communities to build their own toilets without Gram Vikas paying for it. The fact that a lot of them actually accept that we want to build this toilet, to me, is testimony to the brand that we've created. That we are not paying the subsidy anymore, but they are doing it. But I also, I mean, as a last point, Naren, I want, kind of, this discussion has lulled into some kind of la-la land. Because 40 years, the swag you deserve. But let's not forget for a moment that we still haven't talked about return on investment. Yeah. And we cannot get away from it. In 45 years, what is the money that Gram Vikas has spent? And what is the story that we are saying today? Is there no connection at all between them? Is there a need to build a connection? Is that connection, whether that connection is going to be positive or negative is a different matter. But I think the next step for us, next DODM, is actually to talk about how do we also value, because in the private sector it's easy. Shareholder value is already there as testimony. Our brand value does not have a financial value, but creating that brand value has cost, in the last 56 years in Seva Mandir, X amount of crores of money. So we need to also start looking at that.
Sorry, because it's the next EODM. But if you were to read, let's go to Putnam's book, the way he spoke about the difference between North Italy and South Italy as a consequence of these organizations' existence. To me, that's the most fundamental return on investment. But how do you put money value on a more, he looked at the HDI indicators.
I'm so sorry to interject. We have next session starting. Sorry. Yes.
So I think we'll close it here because I think these questions, so in a sense as Libby summarized, we still left with a lot of questions, but I think that was also the purpose of the session, to raise more questions and really give any answers. And this realist process is still a work in process. So maybe the next DODM will have much better clarity on some of these questions, hopefully, or there will be more questions after that. Thank you all so much for patiently listening. Thank you to the panelists. My pleasure.
I would request Avijit Chaudhary to kindly facilitate our speakers and moderator with a token of our gratitude and appreciation. Thank you all for the insightful session. For a month of bugging you all, I am really sorry, I apologize. But really thanking you all for this session. फोटो ले
Tenzin. Where's Tenzin?